Hello everybody, Incon here guys with another little basic tutorial video before we head into Season 6 guys. I've been having a lot of people ask me what exactly that the buffs do in Smite, which I didn't really think about because I've been around for so long. But as new players come in, they don't necessarily know what the buffs do. They don't know what role they're supposed to pick up the buffs or any of the intricacies with those. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Starting, guys, with the right-hand side of the map, we have got ourselves the blue buff. The blue buff typically is going to be picked up by your solo laner for almost the entirety of the game. In the later stages of the game, your solo laner might not pick up the blue buff. They may not need it, and your support may pick it up in the ultra late stages of the game. But for almost the entire game, you're going to have your solo laner picking up. So what does the blue buff do? Well, right off the bat, it's going to give you 20 MP5 and 10% cooldown reduction. Now, people forget that each time you hit an enemy god with an ability, you also regain 2% of your missing mana. This is to encourage boxing over in the solo lane, like we talked about, solo laners pick it up. So this is to encourage you for hitting enemies with your abilities to get a little bit of mana back, be a little bit more sustainful on that. So basically, it's a buff that's like, hey, use your abilities. You're going to get your MP5 back. You're going to have a little bit more cooldown to use your abilities more to hit the enemies. So just a little buff to help you be a little bit more aggressive on those abilities, be a little bit less carefree with your mana. Next up, guys, we have the speed buff. Real quick note in case you're wondering, every single one of the buffs in Smite is referred to by their color except for speed buff, because some people called it yellow buff, some people called it orange buff. At the end of the day, it's speed buff, but the other buffs are called red, blue, and purple. So, you know, this is the speed buff. It's the only one that doesn't get called by its actual name. So, it is what it is. So, speed buff is going to be picked up by your jungler for the entire game. If you accidentally pick up your jungler speed buff, they will smash F6. They will try to surrender. If you accidentally try to help with the speed buff and take some of your jungler's XP, they will rage at you. It is the nature of junglers. So what does the speed buff do? Well, if you guessed correctly, it gives you speed. So it gives you 10% base movement speed. But people always forget the second parts of these buffs. When you kill a jungle camp, you get an additional 2% extra movement speed, stacking up to 3 times. So if you clear a whole camp, 1, 2, 3, you get the triple stacks. You can see they're on me now. So I have an additional 6% movement speed for a total of 16% movement speed. This means that as a jungler, if you have the speed buff, which preferably you have the speed buff basically all the time, right before you gank, if you can clear a buff camp, you're going to have an extra 6% movement speed during your gank to help you get in those extra autos as the enemy is running away. So preferably, you want to try to kill a camp right before you go gank to get those bonus movement speed to help you out. Next up on our buff list, guys, we've got the red buff. The red buff is typically picked up by your mid laner, that is your mage on your team. As you transition a little bit later into the game, sometimes hunters also pick up this buff. Sometimes they start picking up this buff a little bit earlier, especially if they start getting ahead in the dual lane. They get an early kill over in the dual lane. Maybe you fall a little bit behind in the mid lane as a mage. You're not going to be able to get kills with that red buff. Well, if your hunter can start boxing, start getting more kills, get more pressure on the dual lane, invade buffs on that side, you're going to want your hunter pick it up. But mages, almost always in the mid lane, pick this buff up first. So what exactly is red buff going to do for us? Well, this is going to be our damage buff in Smite. It increases your physical and magical power by 10% when you're hitting minions, 15% towards gods, plus it gives you 10 magical power and 5 physical power flat. So you get a little flat buff damage plus the percentage damage, a little bit different towards creeps and gods, a little bit more effective against gods to encourage you to go PvP basically. This is going to be the buff that you want to give to your big damage dealer, like I said. So you want to make sure this is on your strongest character, your most fed character. So you have to pay attention during the game who's getting more fed between your hunter and your mage. You want to be able to give it out and dish it out to whoever needs it the most. So be aware that you might need to give it up as a mid laner. I see a lot of time mid laners get pissed when they're 4 levels down and their hunter's taking the red buff because they're 2 levels up. That's the right play. That's what you should be doing. And you should understand that sometimes you get behind and it happens and you shouldn't be taking the buff anymore. And the last buff, guys, in Smite is the purple buff. Now, the purple buff, I think, is the most misconstrued buff in Smite. Step 1, we have the support standardly picking it up in the early game. They just get the most use out of it. Also, hunters pick this buff up early, especially if you've invaded the enemy's team purple. So you invade the enemy's team purple because you got lane clear. You grab a purple buff on your team. It goes either to the hunter or support. You come back to lane. You go do your own purple buff. The other person in the dual lane should grab it because purple buffs stack, okay? You can have 2 purple buffs, and this aura effect is going to be 2 times the effect. If you put it back onto one person, you're not going to get the double stacked effect. It's just going to refresh the duration of the buff. So make sure that if you're in the dual lane picking these up, you have the hunter and the support picking it up. So what does the purple buff do? Purple buff reduces the enemy's protections by 10 flat of physical and magical, plus an additional 5%, and you get an extra 2 for each enemy nearby god. So if you're in the dual lane, you're basically getting 14, right? Because you've got 2 gods there, so you've got 14 on that. Plus, if you're double stacking it now, you've got upwards of like 30 flat armor reduction plus 10% or something crazy, which is nuts and is going to let you absolutely continue to control and decimate over in the dual lane. So make sure that you're picking this up. It should be also noted that because it scales with more people around you, that it actually scales really well in team fights as well, because if you're in a full team fight, that's actually 20 flat reduction. If you just have one of them, 40 if you have 2 of them. So make sure you're picking this buff up throughout the entire game. It's not useless. A lot of people think it's useless. It's actually very good. It's basically having the passive of, you know, Void Shield or Void Stone just on you for free. Plus, you can have Void Shield or Void Stone on top of that. So get your Aura Pen. It's going to help out your team. It's a great buff. Finally, guys, we've got the biggest buff of them all, the Fire Giant. You didn't think I was going to leave out the Fire Giant, did you? The Fire Giant is the biggest objective on the Smite map. It's going to give you the biggest buff, and it is going to give it to your entire team, and it lasts for 4 minutes. So what does the Fire Giant buff do? The Fire Giant buff gives you 70 magical power, 50 physical power. You regen 4% of your health and 2% of your mana every 5 seconds. And your damage versus towers and phoenixes is increased by 25%. Now, it should be noted that at the 25-minute marker, the Fire Giant buff is called the Enhanced Fire Giant buff, and it basically does all of these things, but just a little bit better. So if you kill the Fire Giant before 25 minutes, you're going to get this buff, Fire Giant Smite. If you kill him after 25 minutes, you get an increased buff. You get like 100 magical power instead of 70. You do extra damage to towers and phoenixes. Just a better version of the Fire Giant buff. Helps people push down in the ultra late game against phoenixes and whatnot. I thought I would include this buff. Some people forget that there is that second tiered version of the Fire Giant buff, the enhanced version. So don't forget, early Fire Giants not quite as effective as those post 25-minute Fire Giants. That's it, guys. Those are all the buffs in Smite. Now, it should be noted that some buffs might see changes as we go into the next season. We don't really know. Historically, buffs stay about, give or take, the same. Although, there is a rumor that we're getting a new buff-ish type thing over by the solo lane. Kind of like how there were fire minions beforehand over there. So we'll see what that exactly turns out to be. We still don't know. We will see when we get the Season 6 patch notes. But thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know down in the comments if there's any other things you would like covered, guys. We've been covering a bunch of these basics as we move into the new season, because once the new season starts, we're going to have a bunch of new stuff to cover. So I wanted to make sure that the basics of Smite, that for more or less are going to stay about the same, are getting covered for all these new players coming into Smite. So thank you guys so much for your support, and as always, have a twitchin' day, y'all. Thank you for watching the video. If you liked the video, please go ahead and hit the like button. And if you like the channel, go ahead and subscribe and ring that bell, guys, in order to get notifications for our uploads. If you want to go the extra mile to help support the Twitchiest community, you can always go to our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Incon and use your Twitch Prime sub there. It's a great way to help support the community. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a twitchin' day, y'all.